You've probably seen the headlines, maybe scrolled past discussions online. It feels like everyone has an opinion on some of these big topics.
Hmm.
But you're here, I think, because you want to cut through all that noise and get to what's really important.
Yeah, get to the core of it.
Exactly. And today we're doing a deep dive into a question that, well, we know is on a lot of people's minds. Can cannabis actually help treat cancer?
It's a huge question.
Mm.
Generates so much interest. And you can see why, right? When you're facing something like cancer, you want to explore every single possibility.
Absolutely. And you shared a really fascinating article about this. It's describing what they call the largest ever study on medical cannabis and cancer.
That's the one. A massive review.
So that's our mission today. We're going to dig into the main findings from this huge analysis you brought to us, really just trying to give everyone a clear picture of what this research might be suggesting about cannabis, tackling this disease.
And we should say up front, it's a field with strong opinions, lots of debate.
Oh, definitely.
So our aim here is really just to offer a balanced look based on what this specific, very large review found in the science.
Okay, let's get right into it then. The first thing that just jumps out is the sheer scale. I mean, reviewing over 10,000 studies, that's enormous.
It really is. The article points out this is way more comprehensive than anything done before in this specific area. It's a major effort to consolidate what we know or think we know.
And it wasn't just like a quick glance either, right? The research had backing from Cancer Playbook and the Whole House Oncology Institute, and they specifically looked at patient-reported data. That seems pretty key, focusing on real experiences.
It absolutely is key. It really emphasizes trying to understand how people actually living with cancer are experiencing things, how they perceive the effects.
Right. And the lead researcher, Ryan Castle, he's the research director at Whole Health Oncology Institute. He made a really interesting point about their goal. He said they wanted to, quote, determine the scientific consensus and to get past what he called the war between cherry-picked studies. That kind of hits home, doesn't it? Try to see the bigger picture instead of just isolated results.
Precisely. Yeah, looking at such a huge amount of work, the idea is to reduce the impact of, single studies that might give a skewed or limited view.
So, given all the legal stuff around cannabis research, how did they even manage to look at so much data? That sounds like a real hurdle.
That's a really good question. And you're right. It is a hurdle. Those big clinical trials with human cancer patients, very difficult because of the legal restrictions.
Right.
So they had to use a broader approach. They included observational studies, looking at existing patterns, but also lab-based studies.
Okay, like in test tubes and things.
Yeah, exactly. Some in vitro, meaning in a dish, looking at cannabis compounds on cancer cells directly, and some in vivo, using animal models to see effects on, say, tumor growth within a living system.
So kind of piecing it together from different types of evidence, Castle even talked about using a radically inclusive methodology based on mathematical reasoning. Sounds very rigorous, trying to avoid bias.
It does suggest a strong effort to be data-driven, yeah. Trying to synthesize findings from all these different kinds of research fairly.
Okay, so they gathered all this data, thousands of studies. What did they actually find? Let's maybe start with how cannabis might affect patients' day-to-day. Symptoms and things.
Well, the analysis found studies with, positive findings, some neutral, even some negative regarding symptoms, but the article highlighted what it called striking results for managing nausea and appetite loss,
Okay.
particularly in patients going through cancer treatment.
That fits with what you hear a lot, sort of anecdotally, doesn't it? That it can help with those horrible side effects. Seeing a big analysis point that way is, wow, it's significant. Could really improve quality of life for people.
It really could. I mean, managing those side effects is huge for a patient's well-being and even their ability to stick with the treatment itself.
Okay, now this next part. This is where I think it gets really intriguing. The study apparently also hinted that cannabis might actually target the cancer cells directly.
That's the suggestion, yes. A potentially much bigger deal.
Yeah. I mean, that's a huge claim.
It is. The research they reviewed showed evidence suggesting cannabis could possibly inhibit the spread of cancer cells.
Wow.
And maybe even promote tumor cell death. There's a technical term for that.
Apoptosis, is that it?
That's the one, apoptosis. So promoting that process.
Okay, hold on. Inhibiting spread, promoting cell death. I mean, that's the holy grail of cancer treatment, right? But I know there's also been a lot of skepticism about cannabis doing that.
You're absolutely right. This idea faces significant skepticism in parts of the medical community. And there have also been concerns raised about, potential links to substance use issues, which complicates the discussion.
So this seems like a good time to bring in another perspective you mentioned. Dr. Donald Abrams, he's an oncologist, professor emeritus at UCSF, tons of experience. What's his take on all this?
Well, Dr. Abrams, based on his long clinical career, he definitely acknowledges that cannabis can be therapeutically useful for symptoms.
Right, the nausea, pain.
Exactly. Pain, nausea, anxiety.
Mm.
He's seen it help his patients with those aspects of dealing with cancer and its treatment.
Okay, so he sees the value there for supportive care. But what about this bigger idea, the potential for cannabis to actually treat or cure the cancer itself?
That's where he pumps the brakes a bit. The article quotes him very directly, saying, "If cannabis cures cancer, I have not been able to appreciate that."
That's a pretty clear statement from someone on the front lines.
It's very grounded in clinical reality, and it highlights something really crucial for listeners to understand. What happens in a lab dish, or even in an animal model, doesn't always translate directly to what happens in a complex human patient.
That's such an important distinction. So we've got this massive analysis suggesting potential anti-cancer effects in studies.
Preclinical studies, man.
But then we have an experienced oncologist saying, look, I'm not seeing cures in my practice.
It really points to that gap, or potential gap, between lab findings and real-world clinical outcomes for patients.
But Ryan Castle, the guy who led this big review, he's still optimistic, isn't he? Despite the skepticism.
He is, yes. He bases that optimism on, well, that preclinical evidence we mentioned, the lab and animal stuff, but also on what he termed encouraging patient outcomes, presumably from the observational data they reviewed.
And it sounds like he's hoping this whole analysis, this huge piece of work, might actually push for changes in, like, policy to help future research.
That seems to be the hope, yeah. He specifically mentioned the DEA, the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration. The hope is they might reconsider how cannabis is classified federally.
Ah, okay. Because the current classification makes research harder.
Much harder. He believes a reclassification could lift some of the heavy restrictions that currently make doing those big definitive human studies so incredibly difficult. And for you listening, those restrictions are a key reason we don't have clearer answers yet.
So the idea is change the classification, make it easier to do the right kind of studies, the ones directly involving human patients.
Exactly. That's what's needed to really figure out definitively what role, if any, cannabis can play in actually treating cancer. More robust clinical trials.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. As everyone's processing this, what are the main things to take away from our deep dive today?
Well, on one side, you have this really large-scale analysis suggesting potential real benefits for medical cannabis in managing some tough cancer symptoms, nausea, appetite loss, things that really impact patients.
Right. Symptom management seems fairly well supported.
And then, maybe more profoundly, it hints at the possibility that cannabis compounds might directly target cancer cells slowing spread, maybe causing cell death, that apoptosis we mentioned.
And this is a big but, isn't it?
It is. It's crucial to also weigh the perspective of experienced doctors like Dr. Abrams. While they see the symptom benefits, they remain cautious, even skeptical, about cannabis as a cure based on what they actually observe treating patients.
So, promising signals from this huge review, especially on symptoms and maybe potential cell effects, but a reality check from clinical experience, and definitely no definitive proof of a cure yet.
That's the tension. Precisely. The research is interesting. It definitely calls for more investigation, proper clinical trials, but getting those trials done faces major hurdles because of the legal situation right now.
It really feels like we're at a crossroads, research pushing forward, potential policy changes may be coming. So maybe a final thought for everyone listening to chew on. Considering the sheer size of this study, but also these very different expert viewpoints, what other questions does this bring up for you personally about where cancer research should go? And thinking about cannabis specifically, what kind of proof, what kind of evidence would you find truly convincing about its potential role in fighting cancer?